Of the Soviet KGB will reveal a story no one even suspected.
Я хотів, що саме на Чорнобильській АЕС працювало 17 агентів і близько 50 довірених осіб.
The agents reported that the atom plant was like a huge time bomb. But would anyone heed their warnings?
Мы говорили правду и нет. Чтобы мы не могли Комитет безопасности не был силы.
Chernobyl is still highly radioactive today. A scientist will investigate the actual control room where the explosion originated.
This way. Here is quite high. We're fairly close to the nuclear fuel that's still inside the reactor unit.
This new evidence finally draws back the veil of secrecy to reveal the of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Chernobyl that scarred an entire generation. An explosion and nuclear meltdown. A cloud of deadly fallout blanketed much of Europe and was detected throughout the world.
Weathermen had predicted that the winds would bring the cloud over nuclear late today. They say it will drift slowly northwards up the coast.
It caused, at the minimum, 5,000 cases of cancer, with more being reported even today. The decontamination effort for a million workers and helped bankrupt the Soviet Union. Whole districts were abandoned. Farmhouses lie derelict. Any crops still too dangerous to eat. But the chain of events which culminated in the explosion in 1986 goes back many decades. That's what led the KGB, the world's most feared spy agency, to place its agents inside Soviet nuclear power plants. Sergei Plokhy grew up in Ukraine. Now he's a professor at Harvard University and author of a history of the Chernobyl disaster.
The people who created the Soviet nuclear industry, those were the very same people who built the bombs in the late 1940s and early 1950s. They genuinely believed that unless they built the bomb, they would be bombed themselves by the United States. They were second to get to the bomb, the atomic bomb. But they were first to build a reactor that was specifically designed to produce electricity. So that was 1954.
In Kiev, the ancient capital of Ukraine, evidence is emerging which shows how anything linked to nuclear power became a state secret. Inside the dusty archives of Ukraine's secret police, a historian has been allowed access to the top secret archives of the former KGB, including their files on Chernobyl. Oleg Bajan was a freshman history student when the reactor exploded. Like many Ukrainians, he felt the true story of the disaster had been hushed up. But now the Ukrainian government has allowed him to study the formerly secret files. which throw light on the time when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union.
І зрозуміло, що з початком будівництва Чорнобильської АЕС було створено Чорнобильський районний відділ КДБ, який, власне, і опікувався роботою і діяльністю і побудовою цього стратегічного об'єкту. Звичайно, коли ми говоримо про Чорнобильську АЕС, то це був стратегічний об'єкт, який був підпорядкований саме атомній промисловості.
The Chernobyl nuclear reactor was of the type the Soviets called the RBMK. There was a good reason why it was classified. RBMK reactors could also make the ingredients for an atomic bomb.
It was top secret in terms of the design because it was a dual-purpose reactor. It was used to produce electricity, but could be used to produce plutonium or weapon-grade uranium. That's why it was all covered by secrecy. The government body that developed the first RBMK reactor was the ministry responsible for Soviet nuclear bombs. So Chernobyl, from that point of view, is a sad irony. It almost was designed to explode.
Chernobyl lies 60 miles northwest of Kiev, 450 miles southwest of Moscow. The vast Soviet Empire lay mainly to the east. In 1970, the Soviets chose a remote area that had been nothing but farmlands as the site for the power plant. But the huge Chernobyl workforce would also need somewhere to live. The city of Pripyat, specially built to support the nuclear plant, numbered 50,000 citizens at the time of the disaster. Their brand new city made them an elite group in Soviet society. One of them was Marina Sivets. And this woodland walk was once one of Pripyat's busiest streets. Marina's husband was a metal worker at Chernobyl.
Припять был молодежный, светлый, белоснежный город, город роз, город молодых людей, город будущего, город рай, город песня. На каждого жителя Припяти был куст роз. Вообще цветы были кругом, на всех улицах. Просторный, веселый, современный город, ну, на тот час современный. Все были возможности для работы, для отдыха, для жизни. Все было замечательно.
Pripyat had grown in line with the power plant. First one reactor, then 2, 3, and 4. But evidence now shows that something had been hidden from Chernobyl's workforce. A design flaw inside the reactor, known only to a small group of scientists, meant that Chernobyl was in reality a giant time bomb. The opening of the Chernobyl nuclear plant in 1977 was hailed as a triumph for Soviet science and technology. But right from the start, there were worries behind the scenes. According to the top secret files of the KGB, their agents were desperately concerned about safety at the nuclear plant.
Я хотів би зауважити, що саме на Чорнобильській АЕС працювало на початок 1980-х років 17 агентів і близько 50 довірених осіб. Тобто довірені особи – це які не отримували платню за ту чи іншу довідку, а просто ті, які були небайдужі до ситуації і симпатизували саме радянським спецслужбам.
The KGB's famous initials simply stand for the Committee for State Security. They were a secret police and spy agency, headquartered in the infamous Moscow Lubyanka building. The Chernobyl branch was there to detect potential foreign agents or saboteurs. But they also picked up disturbing gossip as building continued.
Concrete was laid improperly. It had not been properly mixed, resulting in cavities and splitting. These defects can lead to accidents in the future.
Another document questioned whether Chernobyl's cooling pumps could cope in an emergency, and made a simple but chilling observation.
The design of the reactor also does not provide for a safety containment.
Dr. Claire Corkill is a British scientist who has studied the Chernobyl disaster. She agrees with the concerns of the KGB.
The RBMK reactors were extremely popular, and that was because you could build them very cheaply and you could operate them pretty much non-stop. And for that reason, they were built all over the Soviet Union. Now, one of the main things that you can see on these reactor units is that there's no real containment building. You can just see a thin outer shell. Most Western reactors have some kind of very thick concrete containment.
A secret KGB report from 1983 listed 3 Soviet nuclear plants built without a concrete safety shield.
The Leningrad, Kursk, and Chernobyl nuclear power plants are currently the most dangerous in terms of their further operation, which may have threatening consequences.
The same report pointed to Chernobyl's lack of an emergency cooling system. If something went wrong, the effect would be catastrophic.
At the epicenter of the accident, radioactivity will be 60 times higher than it was during the explosion of atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The stakes could hardly be higher. But would anyone act on what the KGB was saying? The Soviet KGB was alarmed at what was happening at Chernobyl.
Комітет держбезпеки підрахував кількість аварій, які мали місце у період з 1979 по 1982 роки. 27 аварій і декілька десятків це зупинок атомної електростанції.
Radioactive particles have been discovered 5 kilometers away from the plant. They pose the greatest danger, since if they enter the human body, they can cause serious illness.
Як виявилося, що саме ця доповідна записка буде відправлена до Москви, але там ніяк не відреагували.
The KGB's network of spies secretly eavesdropping among the 5,000 nuclear workers meant they missed nothing. A scheme to make money, using the warm but oftentimes radioactive reactor cooling water to grow fish, to sell at market, also broke the safety rules.
Спецслужби б'ють на бак, що ця риба є, по суті, шкідливою для людського організму, тому що у ставку охолоджувачу вода є забрудненою радіоактивними відходами, що в такий спосіб не можна заробляти і робити певний бізнес.
The KGB's top secret memos kept arriving in Moscow, but no one there was listening to their growing alarm.
Мы говорили правду. Единственное, что мы не могли, микросубъектов безопасности не был сильный.
There was no appetite high up to halt work or revise procedures, because the bosses had production quotas to meet.
The general managerial culture in the Soviet Union comes from the 1930s under Stalin, where either you meet the target or you can be accused of being a saboteur and go to prison.
The KGB had spelled out the problems. Chernobyl was badly designed, badly built, badly operated. But what happened to unleash the disaster? The science of nuclear energy is complex. The principle behind it, perfectly simple. Chernobyl's RBMK reactor was no different from any other in its basic design. A continuing controlled nuclear reaction inside tubes in the reactor core generates a massive amount of heat. This heats the water in another set of tubes. The water turns to steam, which drives the turbines to make electricity.
There's absolutely no difference between a coal-fired power station and a nuclear-fired power station, except for where you get the energy from. So when you split an atom of uranium, you get about a million times more energy than you would get if you burned a carbon-carbon bond in coal. After that point, the heating of the water from that energy that's released and the turning of the turbines to create electricity is exactly the same in a coal power station as it is a nuclear power station.
But harnessing the most powerful force in nature requires constant monitoring and managing.
Also inside of the reactor, we have what's called control rods. These are really important. These are like the brakes on the nuclear reactor. They slow down the nuclear reaction so that we can have some control over how much energy is being released.
These control rods, inserted from the top of the reactor, reduce the heat emitted by the uranium. Withdraw them, and the heat builds back up again. In November 1975, a critical design flaw in the RBMK reactor was revealed.
I'm stood right on top of an RBMK reactor, Chernobyl reactor unit number 3, which is identical to the one next door, Chernobyl reactor 4, which exploded. I'm standing on top of the bioshield